So hi and welcome to the second part of the plantar fasciitis or plantar heel pain video series. It's probably going to be the last one actually. The first one was mainly about how shoes can affect plantar fasciitis. But with that, it can be a case of your shoes being better as a prevention rather than a cure. So if you are actually suffering with plantar heel pain and you're in that sort of initial stage of it where it's incredibly painful, then me suggesting that you go into a more flexible or minimalist shoe is probably not going to be something that makes you entirely enthusiastic, and understandably so. On that basis, then, this is more of a generalised chin wag about plantar fasciitis or plantar heel pain, which is a little bit easier to say, but they are the same thing. So you've got an acute stage, which is just that where it starts, and it's so painful that you're struggling to walk first thing in the morning. If you've been resting for a couple of hours or 20 minutes even on the sofa and you get up, it's those first steps that are excruciatingly painful. That stage can last anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks or longer. Everybody's different. There is light at the end of the tunnel though with plantar heel pain, in that it usually is a self-limiting condition. In other words, it will go away on its own, but it could take time, and some people it goes on for a lot longer than 2 to 8 weeks for the initial period, and then anywhere from up to 12 months or even a bit longer, depending on what's going on, what you're doing with it, and those kinds of things. So in those first stages, like I say, 2 to 8 weeks, you want to be taking the load off. So you're trying to find ways of reducing the load on those tissues in the foot. In other words, making yourself comfortable. Now, if that includes more cushioning in your shoe, that's where it takes, that's fine. So you want to be finding a shoe or a pair of shoes, not just the one, a pair of shoes that are as comfortable as they possibly can be. You want to be resting it where you can. Now, if you're one of those people, you're a nurse, something like that, where when you're on your feet a lot, that's going to be incredibly difficult. So shoes are going to come in really handy there. You can get a gel heel cup, and it is exactly, it sounds, it's gel, made out of gel. It sits in your shoe, cups your heel, lifts you up that little bit, gives you that little bit of support, that little bit of cushioning, and is designed to take the pressure off the off those tissues in the bottom of the foot, make you a little bit more comfortable. So there's a point at which then you come out of those initial super duper painful weeks, hopefully, and you move into what they call the load dominant phase, and that's where usually your first steps aren't quite as painful. You tolerate in walking a little bit better, and you can just kind of notice a little bit of a shift. And it's then we can start adding in some loading of the tissues and some strengthening exercises and things like that. In those acute initial weeks where it's incredibly painful, if you can stand it, then they're called isometric mid-range two-leg calf raisers. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? And I'm trying to put it in a way that doesn't sound quite as exciting. It's just a heel lift. But you're standing on a step, not going into a stretch, so you're not dropping your heels below the step. You're starting at neutral. You're lifting the heels up with 2 legs, so not on one foot, on both feet. Lift the heels up and hold. And isometric just means that you're holding under load. And it's thought that the isometrics will they'll stress the muscle of the calves, which is great, but they're not going to put too much either stretch or pressure through the bottom of the foot. Having said that, for some people, stretching the bottom of the foot feels good and it works for them. And if that's the case, that's absolutely no problem. It's not like you're going to do any harm. You are trying to find things that work for you, and everybody's an individual. So even though I'm kind of doing these videos, when I work with people, quite often I'm kind of tailoring the approach to the person in front of me and what they're trying to achieve, and particularly runners and things like that. Interestingly, plantar heel pain correlates with pelvic floor issues as well, so I tend to get both at the same time. Right, so where were we? Low dominant stage. So once you've come out of those early stages where it's hugely painful, you've started to tolerate walking a little bit more, your first steps aren't quite as painful, when they are, you know, the aggravation or the irritation, it kind of settles down after a few sets and it's not quite as painful. That's when the tissues are starting to kind of get that little bit better. And it's only at that point, it's usually a case of, you know, you get flare-ups if you do too much. So at that point you might think, oh my God, I'm getting better, great, I'm gonna go out for a run, or I'm gonna go do something daft, and your foot goes, no, not quite yet. So you're still looking to moderate what you do, but you can start to add in some strengthening and things like that. So in terms of research around it, again, I'm not going to bore you to death with all the research, but it just gives you an idea of the sort of things that go along with plantar heel pain. So they reckon if you've got quite tight calves, and let's face it, who hasn't, tight calves, hamstrings that don't want to give, they can all contribute to it. What else? Weakness through the hips, the core and the glutes, which might come as no surprise because the stronger sort of this midsection is, the less your feet have to do. So there's all sorts you could do at this point. The gold standard is your single leg calf raises with quite a bit of weight and the toes propped up, and at some point I'll get around to videoing that. So single leg calf raises with some weights in your hands to progressively get stronger through the calves. Jumping, hopping and running on the spot, those kinds of things can start to, they're obviously a bit more plyometric, or in other words bouncy, so they're going to stress the calves quite a lot. So they're kind of late stage stuff, but you want to start adding some of those back in, particularly before you start running. So if you're adding in things like I say, jumping, hopping, skipping, before you start running, it gives you an idea of whether your feet are going to be able to cope or not. So day before you say, right, I'm going to do some hop, skipping and jumping. 24 hours later, if your feet are worse, you know you've done too much. If they're better, fantastic. And it'll give you a starting point for when to go back out running. Balance exercises are good, you know, for strengthening foot and ankle, glutes, control around the core, those kinds of things. Your progression into a more minimalist shoe. So barefoot is good at the point at which you could tolerate walking on different surfaces, and you might start off just going out onto grass, sand, packed dirt, earth, whichever, and just having a little bit of a wander, because it's all about strengthening the little muscles of the feet, try to get them stronger and your feet more mobile. A minimalist shoe at the point at which, again, you're starting to heal and you can stand it, will help strengthen your feet as well. You know, while you're in I'm going to call it a normal shoe, so any shoe that isn't minimalist or barefoot is going to restrict the amount of movement that you've got through your feet when you're walking about, and therefore the foot just weakens, just gets weak. It's not being used. It's like any other set of muscles in the body. If you don't use them, they get weakened and eventually, you know, stop working. Not altogether, obviously, otherwise you'd fall over, but you get the idea. So yeah, and then if the last thing about I was going to say pelvic floor, plantar heel pain is chronic plantar heel pain. So the treatment or the way you move forward with it's chronic, and chronic just means you've had it for longer than you would expect with something, you know, like plantar fasciitis. So I've said, you know, 2 to 8 weeks for your acute phase, and you've got that low dominant phase and that sort of recovery phase, which could take 6, 9, 12 months. Again, it depends on you, it depends what work you do to rehab. But if you're going sort of beyond that and it's becoming something that is niggling you sort of on a regular basis, it flares up, it comes back, it goes away, that's what they'd call chronic plantar heel pain. And the approach to that is very, very different. It's a bit beyond what we can go into now, just simply because there's so many different variables with it. So as with all of these things, though, it is important to get it checked out. Come see somebody like me, go see a physio, something like that. Just get it checked out just in case. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. It will heal eventually.